Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm Cora. This is the Builder release, Builder Hour, where we're just going to talk through the cool stuff in the release. So I know I've gotten some feedback from some of you who've seen like the new data editing, data UI, and then metrics. I'm really excited for Dorian to go through. So yeah, we're just going to cover some of the things in the new updates. And then there's actually a ton in there. We just won't get through it all, but if you guys want to see anything in particular, just chat it and I'll make sure that we get to it. So how about we start with data collections? Mark, are you down to show?
Yeah, for sure.
Sure, yeah. So Mark was working on this for a bit, and do you want to talk about both, like, one, here's what y'all will see and be able to use, and then two, maybe like how you thought about approaching building it? That might be kind of fun to share.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can go into the details of any level of it too. And I have that meme generator project that I'm working on is actually a really good use case for it because I'm using, there's some data in there that I need to enter manually. There's data that's just settings data for the project. It's not something the users will modify. It'll never have a UI around it. And it's not something that really gets adjusted much. So those are the kind of data collections that I'll typically use in web apps that I build for different things. So I can show some of those use cases and then talk about what's coming for it. There were several features I had to pull out of it because we just didn't get them done in time. So we can talk about what's to come with it as well. And then there's some things in it too of like how to approach, if we want to get into like the real depths of it, there's some things in there that I had to do because I'm referencing itself in a lot of places because it's like grid rows inside of grid rows inside of grid rows to make all that work. So yeah. Yeah, I'll just show my screen and dive through.
Looking forward to it.
Cool. So let's take a look. This is a project that I'm working on right now. It's called NFT memes, and you connect your wallet and you can pick like a background. So I can select these different backgrounds. And then when I have a background selected, let's choose one of the first collections that we're working with who's going to use this is Chubby Corns, which is a cool one. And I have some of those in my wallet. So you can do fun things like remove the background of the image. So you click there and there we go. And that actually goes and runs an API call to remove that background. And then what I'm doing is I store that in a data collection. So that way next time, if I've already run that API call to remove the background, I don't run it again because it costs money every time I run it. So there's a couple of different data collections that are going on here. There's this data collection of the backgrounds that I'm manually bringing in. There's a data collection for saved background or images with removed backgrounds. There's a data collection of the users. Whenever you sign in with Metamask in this one, I'm actually creating a Web2 session just using our Metamask sign-in action that we launched. And it goes in and creates that user. And then there's these settings things on here, like I can toggle on and off whether or not the meme generator for this use case allows you to add text, or whether it'll allow you to save the thing for future use or anything like that. You can basically toggle things off and on in a settings collection. So let's take a look at those different methods real quick. So if I go over to data collections, and let's look at the meme backgrounds collection first. This is what builds out that list of backgrounds that was on the right side of the panel over there. And I can zoom a little bit. That's probably pretty small there. So I just created 4 fields. So I came in, just added 4 fields. One is just a checkbox for whether or not it's active. Another is this collection slug. And this is from a service called OpenSea. Like I just know that I'm basically tying, this is something I'll use for filtering later. So I just manually put it in and say, later, if someone has an NFT in that collection, then I'll show these backgrounds. Otherwise, they don't see those backgrounds. I haven't done that filtering yet in here. And then an image source. And in this case, I actually kind of combined 2 things. I wanted to control these images long-term, so I didn't want to use external sources for the background images. So what I did is I went into my media library and uploaded each of these backgrounds. So if I click on this background, and one of the new features that came out in the release was this copy CDN file path. So there's 2 file paths for every image. The regular file path of an image are like / document / and then the file name. That goes through the web server and can do things like if the files are restricted and only accessible by users who are authenticated, it'll go through and do that check. The CDN file path is a public path. And it's on a CDN, so it's globally distributed. It's going to be way faster to access that image. So all I did was I copied that CDN file path and then go into that collection of backgrounds, and I would just paste it in to the thing. So I'm manually uploading these backgrounds. So this is something that this is more like settings data of the app, right? This isn't user generated data going on here. And then I just put a name in here. So if we look at how I'm using that, go to this memes page, go to the flows, and let's just look at the page load. So on page load, I'm doing some caching. I'm checking to see if you're signed in. I do some other things. Oh, I think sorry, I forgot. After they sign in successfully, no, it's not after. Sorry, my bad. Page load, gotta remember where this is. Oh, duh. It's just bound. There is no action running it. It's just data bound to it. So I'm pulling in the meme backgrounds, but I'm only pulling in the ones that are active. So it's where active is 1. You can do true, you can do checked, you can type any relevant thing to a checkbox and that will match up. So basically,
Mark, is active a field that you set?
Yeah, so if I go to meme backgrounds, there's this active column here. So for instance, if I don't want that Planet of the Apes one, so if you recall in here, if I look at the backgrounds, there's this Planet of the Apes one. So if I don't want that one, I can just uncheck that. And I don't have this running through resonance or anything, so I do have to refresh. But when it loads, it now won't have that one because it's no longer active, right? So this is how I use data collections for settings type data, where I want to determine what to show based on settings inside of the collection. And these collection settings, because there's no access, there's no admin UI, there's no way for anyone else to modify these at all. The only way to do it is to have access to the studio. So that means only you who's creating the project can actually modify these pieces of data. And in a similar way, I have another collection called settings, and I just have a name of a setting here and whether that setting is on or off. So like allow text elements, if I turn that off and then refresh over here, when the user comes in, you'll see there's no, I'll connect again. There's no more add text button down here. There was an add text button there before. So what I'm doing is I use this data to perform conditional checks to see whether or not something should be done. And there's 2 ways to do it. One is like this, where I'm doing a binding with a filter. Another way to do it is, if we look in here, this is checking the settings collection, and I'm checking that particular record ID. And to get that ID, I just went into the collections, went into settings, found this one, and just copied the ID and paste it in here. So that's basically just saying now in the settings, check the on off. If the on off is 1, then show it, otherwise hide it. And so now I'm just basically checking that setting, and each setting can work that way. So the goal of this project here, what I'm doing with this is, it's not like a SaaS. This is basically a template that collections can use to add meme generators to their own projects. So they're going to get a project template of this, put it into their own Bildr account. They'll go set these settings in the data in that account, upload their own background images and all those things, and then publish it. For the Chubby Corns one, for these backgrounds here, these are actually being created by that team, the artists on that team, and they're going to launch it with memes.theirdomain.com. whenever they're ready to go. So I think it'll be next week whenever that launches. So
And,
those are,
and then,
Yep.
sorry, Mark.
No, go
So
ahead.
then the people who have Chubby Corn's NFTs will be able to like put their NFTs on these
Exactly.
backgrounds and manipulate them and like create cool images.
Yeah. So it's like, this is kind of how it's like, if I grab this and maybe flip it like that, and then we'll make him, he's just hanging out up there. Make it a little smaller. Maybe like that. All right. So you just kind of like move your things around there. So there's one type of data collection I'm using for these settings, right? There's also other data collections in here. Like when I hit that button to remove the background, it looks like I have a bug. It's resetting it back in the original position. When you remove that background, if I go look at that button, remove background here, and go to the events, we can look and see what it's doing here. So I go check, this is going to see, I do a filter to see if there's already in this images without backgrounds collection, if there's one where the token ID matches the current token ID of that NFT, of that image. So think of the token ID, it's just like any other ID. It's just a unique identifier for that record. So basically I'm checking to see, do I already have an image stored for this image without a background? And if I do have one, then I just go get that image from the data collection, which is going to be that CDN path, kind of like what we looked at before. If I don't, then I run this API call to create the image. Then I save that record to create the images without backgrounds. And then next time somebody clicks that button for that particular NFT, it's going to find that we already have one. The nice thing about doing it this way is someone could also in their own collection, if they don't want to, because this API costs money to run. It's like 10 cents per image or 5 cents per image, depending on what you're doing. And when you have 10,000 NFTs in a collection, it can add up decently fast, You can pay $1,000 to run all these background calls. So they could go, they have access to their artwork. So they could save that $1,000 and go into the collection and create all of them. Just manually go create all those records. Or when they go and do it in the UI the first time, we can make an automated way of doing that. But basically they would come in with 1,000 of them and just reference those images directly without the backgrounds. And then that way, when someone comes in, it's just automatically going to do it. So this is basically the most common use case for these data collections in the UI is going to be, I have some data that I need to modify myself. I have other data that the user needs to create and I might need access to modify, right? And so that's where you're just coming back and forth and doing different, whatever you need to do there. One other way that I'm using these, I have allowed NFTs and access collections. So the access collections right now, if I sent you to my site, my meme generator site, and you don't have one of these collections in your wallet, and at least one NFT from one of these collections in your wallet, you won't get access into the site. So when it'll fail on trying to get you in whenever you do the wallet connect. And I'm doing that on the sign up with MetaMask page where I check to see if you're already authenticated. If you are, then I just skip and check the collections. If not, then I sign you in with MetaMask. So if we're checking the collections, what I'm doing first is I check the settings to see this setting is checking to see if I have the setting turned on to restrict access based on NFT collections or not, right? Because sometimes maybe you want to make a meme generator that just lets anyone with any of their NFTs do whatever they want to do. But if you want to restrict it, you just go check that box. And then if that is true, then I go and get all your collections. So I get the wallet, I go do an API call. And then at the end of the API call, I run another condition where prior to doing the condition, I run this action that does a filter by array. So this is a really cool action. If you haven't used this yet in Bildr, what I have is one array of data, so one JSON array of objects, and I have another JSON array of objects, and there's some matching data inside, and I only want to keep the matches that are across the two. So I go get my master set, which in this case is OpenSea collections. And the property I'm looking for in there is the slug. And I want to match that against the assets that I have. I set this variable before. So that was what I said in the last action. I said, what do you have? And then I do a check. Basically, it's almost like doing you're effectively filtering out anything that doesn't match this second filter set. And then I have a toggle for keep only matches or remove matches. So you can do either. I'll keep the matches. And then I set the response into a variable called matching collections in wallet. And then the very last step is I check to see, does matching collections in wallet, get the length of that. If it's greater than or equal to 1, then I know they have one of those NFTs in at least one NFT in one of those collections in their wallet, which means I can get them access into it. So you can basically, now I'm taking like internal data mixed with API data. I'm combining the two together, running conditional logic on that, and then doing sets of things. So this is in more and more complex web apps, really common scenarios. You have like manually created data that you're setting up one-off, like my settings stuff. You have data that's generated by users inside the UI. And then you have API data that's never actually stored, but you're using it, mixing it with the internal collection data to do different things inside your web app. So yeah, I'd say those are like the main use cases for the data. Before I go any further, do we have any questions, or do I can just go into like create some data? You can just do some of that too.
Can you take us back to the data UI and let's talk about like the changes, like creating new fields,
let's do
the inline editing where you can click to copy the IDs and stuff like that.
Let's do just like a brand new project. I have naming conventions for all my projects because I make test projects like 5 times a day. It ends up being a mess in there. All right, so I'll just add a blank page here so we can. All right, so I'm going to go make a new collection, and we'll just call this items. And that's going to pop open the collections editor. So right now there's 3 different things you're going to do to a collection. One is collection settings, which has these are the same settings as before. How do you want to require authentication? Do you want restrictions? All that stuff. Nothing changed there in this last release. Just moved the positioning of that settings area around. And then these 2 buttons for adding fields and adding records. So adding records literally just creates a new row. I don't have any custom fields in here yet, so it's just all the default fields. And then if I add a new field, we'll do a text field to start, but you can change it here as well. We'll just create a new field. So here's my new text field. These fields you can just enter into, so my text value, whatever it is. You can copy that out and it'll copy it to your clipboard. All the cells will have that copy link on them. So if you need to grab like an ID of a record or something, you can do that. Changing the name, you can do it here. So if I wanted to say text field, I could just name it there. And then clicking here gives you the same thing. If you go rename, you'll just select it. If you go field type, it will open up the field type selection. So in here,
Types is new.
Yeah,
I think we've had people ask that before. Could you talk to us a little bit about why we put field types in there?
Yeah, field types is, there's a couple of reasons. There's no technical reason that you actually need a field type in Bildr. The database, every column inside of the data table will store any type of data. So it doesn't really make a difference for the technical side of like why I have these types. But from a UI perspective and a UX perspective and just what people expect inside of these types of systems, they are wanting that, right? But it also gives us some leverage in other areas once you have it. So once I know this is a text field, I can do things like make UIs where this is actually a number input that won't accept anything except for numbers. For instance, if I do like a single select, I can add options to it and option 2. And I actually fixed several bugs in this yesterday with the options. One of those bugs is that this menu doesn't update unless you close and reopen it. So now if I go in there, I have option 1 and 2. So you can do things just a little bit easier in terms of creating those field types and setting them with the right kind of data. And then the other place that comes into play, the thing that I didn't get out in this release that I was trying really hard to get out is you can click a button here and edit and do an edit mode where I just generate a form for you. That will have longer term implications of allowing you to save variations of the form, like hide and show fields, rearrange all those fields on the form. It's making a really simple form generator and then allowing you to embed those forms somewhere for data entry, just to make it like super simple for data entry. So that's coming next. I wish I had have gotten that out, but I didn't quite get it there. So that's really the longer term leverage of having the field types, is it just makes it easier down the line. Now, what we probably will not do, which would be an expectation of a lot of users, but we probably still won't do it, is force any kind of, like if I were to type in here, if I come in here and put a number input on here, I don't think we're going to be doing any forcing where you say, you know, from items, and we only give you the fields from, you know, like only the number fields, you know what I mean? And the reason is that technically on the back end, you can kind of put anything you want anywhere you want it. And this is just a display. So we're probably not going to go there. Don't hold me to that 100%. We may end up restricting it, but for the most part, we don't like to do those kind of restrictions, because you can come in here, for instance, and just change this to email or change it to whatever you want. And it's still got the 0 value in it, but it's no longer a number input, right? So now how does that work with the data that's bound? And we give you so much freedom in here that when we start doing those restrictions, that we have to start restricting other things in the UI. And that's the kind of downstream thing that then removes a lot of the power. So in terms of new field types, or why we did the new field types and what they're used for, it'll primarily be for making it faster and easier to create data entry forms, like simple data entry forms, but then the full complex UIs, you'll still have full power there. We won't restrict any of the power in the full UIs.
I think that's correct. People should be able to change things easily and not have to, you know, think about all that. And if you have an existing data collection and you don't have any field types, does it default anything, or can they just go in and select these?
Yeah, they'll all default to text. So
Okay.
you can go select them. And then if you do select them, then you can use the editor for that type of data. And just be careful with, it won't modify the data if it's the wrong type. So it'll keep your data. So like if you, let's say you have a text value and you change the field type to number, that text value will stay in there as a text value unless you go modify that particular record in that field, and it's going to update it to whatever you updated it to, and it's no longer a text, it's whatever number you changed it to. In the short term, there's really the only use case for doing that would be if you want to manipulate the data inside of here, and you want to do that quickly and easily. Setting those field types will make it easier, especially as you add a bunch of fields. You know, if you're adding lots and lots of fields in here, it will get much easier if you've got all the field types in there. So it's not just all text strings everywhere. That being said, I tend to keep things as text strings most of the time anyways. Like a lot of those things, it's totally up to you. You don't ever have to set those field types if you don't ever want to. They can always stay text if you prefer that, however you want.
All right. Can you show us how to delete a record?
Yeah. So it's pretty straightforward. Let me add a couple more in here. So you just check the box over here, or you can do a select all. And when whatever you've got selected, you just click delete selected up here, and it's going to delete those rows, and that's it. Now that is a permanent delete, and we will be adding, I have it on my list to add a warning in there, because you really should have a warning of like, hey, this is going away forever. So be careful with that right now before our short release that'll be out soon. We're doing a quick release for like all the minor bug fixes we're finding and things like that. There'll be another quick release, and that warning will be in there.
Okay, use wisely.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you can now add records, you can inline edit the values, you can copy the values, and then you can also delete records. And then so all of the data that you have in your projects will automatically show up in here. There's nothing that you need to do. Cool. So any questions on that? I know we've got a couple in like what's coming. So Mark, if you want to chat about that. Steve is asking about an exporting to an unelegant CSV. And then Tom is asking about potentially importing. And I know we've had a few users ask about how can like I add some more records or fields faster. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so export and import were both, I have buttons already in there and they're close. I actually released actions for doing CSV to JSON. That was specifically for the import. There's also a JSON to CSV that hasn't been released yet into the studio, but that'll come out as well. And that's all from us getting this ready. We're, as always, we use Bildr to build Bildr. So whatever we need, we're going to release those things as action types as we go. And that's where those are coming from. So yeah, those are both coming, export and import. The export will just be a straight CSV file, super simple. The only part that we'll have is likely an option on there will be, do you want field IDs or field names as the columns inside of that CSV? Because by default, it would just pull the IDs from everything. So you'd have, rather than it saying, number, it would say whatever that is, BCLRO, whatever, right? As like the column. So if you opened it in a spreadsheet, it would show as the column headers would be the field IDs. So we probably will give you an option for which one do you want? You want the IDs or do you want the names? And then on the import process, you'll have to do a merge of some sort or a mapping of some sort where you have to tell us what is going into the number input, what's going into text input, and what do you want to do with data that doesn't match the field type? Like my preference 99% of the time is just bring that data in and set it in there, and because it can store it, it's just the field type is only for display anyway, so just store it. Copying and duplicating records, absolutely. Duplicating will be the first part of that, which is much easier. It's just pretty simple. Copying, I've got a question for you, Fraser, on is that like, do you want to copy the JSON object? What do you want copied in there? Is it like copy and then paste into something else, or you just want the JSON object?
Well, just in your user interface here, when you have a row and you just want to copy it and make one change to something. So just in terms of your user interface here. But
for copying the entire row?
Yeah.
And what would you do with the copied value though? What's like to paste it into another row?
For example,
to
these were
it?
people. These were people, the individual people were records, users, for example. Then you could copy the whole row and then just change what's different about the next person. And so you're building out this, this list of things, which has got very similar things, but you'd have to be careful not to copy over the created date and the modified date and created by. Those would have to be live and appropriate to whoever's doing the work. But it's just a normal thing I would do.
So I would say like, duplicate would handle that, but you just don't do the created and modified because that would never be accurate.
Yeah, and that's doable too. But the copy paste I could see as well, right? Like if I had 10 records in here and I make an 11th record and I know that record is basically Mark with one change, so copy that. I made a new record already. I have it in there, it's like copy, paste over the other record with the data from the first one, and then just modify those two things. So I think both of those things make sense. So if it's only, that was my main reason for asking about, like, do you want like the JSON object, like to your clipboard, or are you really is it internal in here? And Fraser nailed the response on.
Yeah,
how
I
he
think
wants to use
it should be internal, but I can see, you put it whatever you want in there, we'll make use of it. So
Yeah, sure.
And then IDs would of course have to be different. Those could never be
Yeah.
identical. Okay.
Yeah, the way that I would actually do that, I would copy the entire row to a JSON object. So that copy, what it would do is just take the object, I would store that in a variable, and then I have an action that I'll be releasing into the studio soon. That's just, you literally just give it a property name and an array, and it just removes that property from all objects in the array. So I'll remove ID, create a date, modify date, created by. That'll keep everything else. And then just do a save record to the same collection with that information, with that stuff, and it'll just create it. And then pasting it in is the same thing. I just basically send it to this ID with these values and it updates it. So that's how I'll do it. I'll actually do my copy actually will be copy the JSON, I'll have the object stored and manipulate that JSON and then set it back in.
Love it. So does anyone, let's wrap up some data so we can go check out metrics. Does anyone have questions for Mark? Feel free to chat them. And yeah, Dorian, calling you up. So that was great, Mark. Thank you so much. I love the data. Everybody loves the data. And I'm sure the import and the export will be awesome. And thank you all for the feedback as well on what you'd like to see there. Okay, so Dorian built this awesome metrics V1 with Radu on our team as well. And so Dee, take us through like, what are all the things that you see in there? And then Mark, I'm sure you'll have some input or like kind of talk to us on why we chose those specific metrics and how they will be helpful to the user. And then, yeah, let's just see what it does.
Cool. Can everyone see that screen pretty well? I resized it to make it a lot smaller. So, all right, so this is just a little test project that I just used. The only reason I opened this one is just because I constantly go to the preview and it's been creating metrics, for several days now. But when you go into the studio, on the left side, there's this new metrics menu here that you can click on. If you click that, that's gonna take over the studio here and open this little metrics dashboard that we started working on. First thing you'll see at the top is just metrics, the project name, just because it does take over the whole studio, just a simple way so you know where you're at. On the right side, what it does is it actually defaults to showing the current month. And this is actually using those new actions that I added to everybody. That's like using the date add, subtract, date trims, date divs. So I made this work using those three actions. If you do click on this menu, you can just manually change the dates if you're trying to look for data in different date ranges. If you do click on this little drop down arrow though, this is going to give you several options, and this basically uses those actions to just set like yesterday's dates or today or last month, this month, last year, this year. And this is all using those actions that are in there for everybody now. To the right of that, I then also have a new drop-down menu, which does default to just showing all the deployments. But the reason we have this is so that you can see metrics based on specific deployments. Like, if you're looking at your development, your test deployments, productions, patterns, or whatever deployments you create, it's all dynamic. So it just pulls on what that project has in there. Down below, you're going to see several charts here. And actually, let me toggle this back to this month so we can see some actual data in there. So the first one here is just a count of all the page views. And it's just organized by date. So you can kind of see here what we're looking at for this specific project. Inside of each of these little menus, you can actually change to a different type of graph if you want to see it differently. It does default to the line, but you can always come in here and just toggle them based on however you want to see that information. So you'll see that on all of them. They're all identical. So the next one's just the data data records, basically a count of all the data records that were requested on your pages. We have documents, which refers to any document, so images, anything uploaded to the media library, or also data collection documents. And then the last one is APIs. This project actually doesn't have any, so this count is 0, but any external APIs that you run in your project, that will start counting that information and then plot it here for you. Down at the bottom is just going to give you the actual list view of all the data that's driving the metrics on this page. So first thing you're going to see is the column for type. And right now it's just broken out by these 4 different categories. And most likely we'll probably continue to expand this and add more options further down the road. But right now it's just your pages, any documents, your data records, or API calls. Second column is the date stamp. So the time the request went through, the time it ended, also gives you a duration. If there was a size in the request, that's going to calculate. Most of these here are 0 because after you load it the first time, it gets cached, so it doesn't count against that. So it just brings it in at 0, just like it would. And then the last thing is just gives you information about that request. So in this case, this first one here happened to be a form that I called edit. And then it also tells me what deployment executed that metric that was generated for that page. So any questions on the data and what we're looking at here?
I've got some. You guys should just chat, but this is probably my favorite thing in here. Okay, so for the pages, that is going to show the users how many times their users are looking at the different pages in their app, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that is like super valuable information because you guys can see, or like you can begin to imagine a flow, right, of like how various pages are kind of like performing in your app, or how many times something is being viewed. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So like first things that I usually go in here now that I have this information, usually I tend to just look at the duration of how long a page takes when it's requested, just for optimization.
Okay.
You know, because if you see something that's taking like this one here, 1.92 seconds, to me, that's a little too long. So there's probably some pre-caching or optimization that I would actually go and start tackling on that page to try to determine what's happening there. So it's a lot of information you can get from the metrics. You just got to look at the data and understand what you're looking at, right? We'll continue to expand on this because immediately things that I'm already wanting is like, well, I want to filter it based on one specific page now, you know, and additional filtering and stuff like that. But
yeah,
this will evolve over time. It's just the first, you know, phase of this. But,
okay.
Yeah.
That is super cool. Okay, so duration is awesome, and that's really more relative to pages because you could see how long they're taking to load, and then the actual page views at the top is showing you the count.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, and then Fraser has a question because I want to know how I think duration plays into the other ones, like whether it's relative to APIs or not. So Fraser's asking the duration of API calls. Are they server to server or client to server to server? How are those being calculated?
100% sure. I'll have to go look because I'm not 100% sure how it's tracking that.
Okay.
I would think it's the whole turnaround when it's initially
is.
requested and by the time it makes it back to the client.
Yeah,
I'd expect it to be that total time. But yeah,
Okay.
I can confirm.
I'm pretty
that.
sure that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's one small thing I was forgetting on here that's for data records. And I'll probably end up renaming this to data collection because that's really what it is. But because this is requesting a data collection, and it's actually returning 4 total records inside of that data collection. So just one thing to keep a note whenever you're looking at the information, that's what this number in parentheses refers to under data record right now, which I'll rename that later.
Cool. Yeah, we should do that. So it's really showing the request of a data collection, not necessarily a specific record.
Correct. Yeah, because
Okay,
the
cool.
request is not pulling a record one at a time. It's getting the whole array of what you requested and then giving you a total count.
And then, so what we see under duration for document, is that how long it takes a document to be fetched?
Exactly. Yeah, and this is where you'll see the difference. One of the things that Mark was showing earlier in the media library, if you're requesting a document going through like our backend document controller, which goes through authentication, if that collection and document requires a user to be authenticated, you'll see the difference, because that's going to be a lot slower versus then requesting that document going directly through the CDN path. So another reason why we now have that copy CDN path, because that will also speed up the load time of your documents.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. And then as far as size goes,
That's just the request total size, so the amount of information that was transferred to the client. Most of these are showing 0 because it's already cached, but probably if I scroll down, let's see where are those documents. Like this was the original data collection, so it took about 242 kilobytes to request that. And then after that, it was already cached, so it was always just 0, it looks like. Well, actually, no, it looks like I'll have to look at that one too.
Yeah, for the documents, I think this might actually be showing some of our internal document requests too. That's what I'm seeing here.
Yeah.
I don't think you actually have, do you have images on here? Maybe it is the images. And they probably are all cached in your browser. So you're going to see the request, but it's not going to have any data on it because it's actually getting it from the local environment. And you're not getting, you're not kind of having that apply against you at all. Fraser, to answer your question, there are 2 independent tallies. So because the data records are actually requested either async in a separate request, or depending on how your configuration is set up, it's a different request altogether. Like it's get the page, bring it in, and then an action goes and loads the data or something. So it'll be a totally separate request. But the page load should not be inclusive of any of that data. You'll see it as 2 separate items in here.
okay. And then question on the docs, those are showing the documents that the project is rendering to the end user, not, so we don't see like uploads. Like if there's an image uploader in the, say like it's a user account and the user's creating and uploading an image to their profile in that app, we're not going to see that here.
It will after it's uploaded, because after it uploads it, it does a request to retrieve it to display it.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then anytime that person loads that user profile page and that document is requested, you'll see that.
Yeah, you'll see it, and it logs it whether it's cached or not. And what I'll do is, because right now this one here, it's actually not showing any information because it's cached. But I'll definitely want to upgrade that to show that, this is the file name and it was retrieved through the cache. So it's very clear. Because right now seeing it empty is kind of confuses, like, well, what was that?
hey, this is just B1. All right, this is just B1. Which is great, because now like we're seeing it, we're getting feedback. It's good. We'll know how to make it better. But I think it's fantastic, Dorian. You guys did such a good job on this. So let's see. Does anyone have more questions on metrics? Or Mark, did you want to?
Yeah, let me, I want to just kind of say like why this isn't just for informational purposes, right? Like eventually we are going to have to start charging users for their actual usage when they go over limits and things, like right now we just like your $9 or $29 a month and unlimited data usage. And we're starting to get some users who are, costing us quite a bit of money now in their execution. So we will eventually have to like actually begin charging for that, and it's coming. And so this is kind of a precursor to that. Most projects will likely stay under the threshold of the minimum. Almost all projects I would expect to stay there, just because most projects don't take off in some huge way and have, tens of thousands of hits every day going on. But we do need to charge for the ones that do, right? So that's one of the reasons, like Cora's question about, are we seeing when someone uploads? We could add metrics for that, but you would never get charged for the upload. You would only get charged for taking it out, right? Like we're not going to be charging for storage of that. If we do end up doing that, it's going to be at very, very large limits, because that's how we get charged. The goal here was to show you in a way that something that's consumable for pretty much anyone who's looking at this data. Like you can understand really easily how many data records were retrieved and the size of that retrieval, right? So that's an important metric to charge for, in our opinion, versus something more esoteric, like, trying to create units that encapsulate sets of things and then charging you per unit, something along those lines, which is how we have to deal with billing, right? We have to deal with billing with infrastructure providers in that crazy way of like, what exactly is a CPU unit? And how do I know what I'm paying for here? It's very difficult to read through. Even being on the inside of it's hard to see. So what we're trying to do is give a really high level interpretation of that information in a way that makes sense for you all, is profitable for Bildr, and can scale, right? So it's low enough cost in the beginning to where you can run almost every project at the base level. And then if you scale up, it's a fair price going forward. So that's what the basis of this really is for. So yeah, just thought I'd throw out there what the full on intent is. And then the other thing that I think is missing from here that I really want to see, we just didn't get into it. I think we're already tracking the data though. Dorian, correct me if I'm wrong, is user information about who loaded that document, who loaded that page, who asked for those records. I think we're already tracking that. Am I wrong, Dorian?
No, we have it. I
Okay.
just was able to get it in there.
I always
Cool.
get anxious when I hear the word tracking because I'm like, I'm just such a cynic. I'm like, for what nefarious purposes?
Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit, like, what is that really for? Like, what would be the benefit of?
Well, for instance, on top of Bildr, you can build your own platform of something, right? So like, for instance, my NFT meme generator, if I made that into a SaaS and I sold it to NFT collections as a SaaS product, I would need to charge them based on their customers' usage, right? So as the builder of that project, I need to go see, was it collection 1, 2, or 3 that cost me all this money? And I need to charge them based on that. So I need to know which user is associated to which one of my customers and which, so you have to have some of that level of data when you're building a SaaS product. So you just kind of have to. Now, that doesn't mean you have to store, confidential information or know that information in order to do it. It's really more, but that's not really up to Bildr. That's up to you all and how you build your project, right? So if you decide to capture their social security number and their, home telephone number and things like that, and then you decide to put that into, some data UI or something, like we really can't control that. We don't even know what you're doing in there. So it's really on you all to handle your own privacy in that, from that perspective. From a billing perspective, that's really what we're after here. What we're trying to do is provide our customers with the ability to build SaaS products and charge their customers effectively, which means you have to be able to track which user in your project is doing what.
Right. And how much it's costing to run your project. Okay.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay. Thank you for the explanation. Use IDs, everybody. Okay, cool. So let me see. Were there any other questions on metrics, or do you guys want, is there
There's a
anything that
couple.
you'd, yeah, okay.
There's a couple in there. You cannot load it in another tab yet, other than like you could just open the studio again and have the studio open twice, one with the metrics open, the other with not. So technically you can go ahead and do it, but they're not updating live. there's no resonance push going out to any of this. I think we could probably just put a refresh button on here though, and just go in and do a refresh on it.
Yeah, I can probably add like a toggle that says, auto refresh every X amount of time.
Yeah, something like that. The other thing to note there, this is data that's stored inside of your project data containers. So it's not in some like generalized metrics container where it's mixed with other projects' metrics. This is all stored within your project. We treat this as part of your data, just like everything else you create in Bildr, we treat it as your data. So when you do that request, one of the concerns with metrics most of the time when people are building out metric suites is this data can get massive very, very fast if you are combining it all together, because like then we would have to be thinking about all the metrics of all of our customers combined to do all these queries. So that was one of the reasons we decided, no, we'll put it inside of every project's set of containers. So that way, when you're doing this request, you're only hitting your own containers of data. There's never going to be data overlap. And also it just reduces the load on the servers going to retrieve all this information because it's only whatever's inside of your project. And then there was a question about the date time. Oh yeah, Drew just did one of these, right? Didn't you do one of those, Drew, recently? It's like a countdown.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, is that what you mean? Like basically like either a countdown timer or like showing the actual time or updates every second? Because I did just build something that could easily be converted into that.
It'd be showing the actual time date
Yeah.
in real time.
Yeah, I can take this countdown thing I have and a couple tweaks, so it would work as an element for that and just, yeah, basically display the time. That'd be kind of cool.
That'd be cool. I could use that in a couple of places.
Nice, yeah.
I'm just looking for a simpler way to do it. I have one that someone helped me, and we used a function, and then turned into an action, and it's quite an ordeal. So
Yeah, you're thinking an element that you can just style.
Drop on the page.
Ideally, it'd be nice.
Yeah, that'd be cool, Drew. Just do an element with those toggles of like, do I want a counter counting up from now? Do I want a counter counting down from a point in the future?
Or
we want
real time.
Yeah, that'd be really cool to have those. Yeah, and then just like current time.
Yeah. Date, time, and seconds. Beautiful.
Nice.
Cool. So I'll put a little note here for a feature request for like a clock element.
That's essentially, but they've added the timer up and down thing, which is, it's kind of like the iPhone timer clock thing, come to think of it. But yeah.
Okay. Cool. I will add that to my list. All right. Okay, so we are coming up at 9:58, and I know, like I did say, we were going to repeat Bildr Hour again. So what I'm thinking is like, why don't we actually do the SaaS starter, and then after that, whoever needs to drop off can drop off, and then we'll come back and revisit metrics and data for.
What about
anyone.
MetaMask sign in? I think that was next.
Yeah, we have the sign in.
Comes in at 10. Yeah, sure. The MetaMask sign in. Drew, you're on, right? Yes. Okay.
All the things.
This is fun.
I only said let's make sure and do that because I think John has to leave in a minute, and I know he would be interested in knowing more.
Okay.
Can we do that right now?
Yeah.
Let me see. I guess let me just share my whole screen. I want to make sure the MetaMask thing shows up when I screen share. This is actually so simple to look at, so it's kind of a funny thing to show. But what we have in this release is like an actual authentication into Bildr using MetaMask. And so like we've been talking a lot about crypto and NFT stuff at Bildr, and MetaMask is crypto NFT related, but also it's potentially the future of how people will authenticate, because it's what it is like, and what crypto is at its core is you have this like public key and private key, and they authenticate you trustlessly. And it's this new system that's actually much better and more secure than like username, passwords, and even two-factor authentication, stuff like that. So actually what MetaMask and sign with MetaMask is potentially like the future of where auth is going. That's kind of why it's so important to us. I mean, we love the NFTs and like we have fun with that, but it's more than that too. Just wanted to mention. But basically what this is like I'm on a test site I'm building. If I click connect, it pops open a MetaMask window, which I assume you can all see that. And, I have a crypto wallet signed in here. So I'm just signing, right? I'm basically proving that I'm the person I say I am through this MetaMask extension, which is handling all the security side. I sign it and now I'm signed in as a Bildr user. And so these things that are showing up here are attached to like my specific user. And so I have a wallet address showing up here and I'm showing things tied to me. I didn't have to enter any username or password. I didn't have to do anything. If I go to another computer, as long as I have my wallet, which sometimes is like a physical wallet if you want to be really secure, and sometimes it's just a browser extension, I can sign in anywhere and get my data. And in the studio, what it does is it actually creates a user that's called MetaMask dot and then a wallet address, instead of, traditionally in Bildr, users are created with an email address. This is actually storing a unique string for me as a user without taking any of my private information. But at the same time, now I have access to everything in Bildr that I would have with authentication. So I can do like the conditional check to see if they're signed in. I can sign them out. Like even in this sign up button in this app, it's just the standard Bildr action called sign out. Like once they're signed in, I'm done with MetaMask. I'm in Bildr, they're authenticated completely privately, completely securely, all that stuff. And so, yeah, like if I click this, it signs out, like their user is signed out now. And if I want to sign back in, I connect again through MetaMask. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. And the only other thing I would show is that, let's see, to actually run this, it's literally just this one action, sign in with MetaMask. And you get to choose a flow for a successful sign in, a flow to run on error. And you can also choose a flow if in MetaMask, you can have multiple accounts. So if you change your account, you can choose whether you want to sign them out and re-sign them in with their new account or whatever you want to do. But all it is just this one action. You can search for MetaMask, and I think there's 3 of them now that come up. So we have connect, which is like a not as secure sign in where you just get their wallet address. We have this secure sign in that we just made, which is basically a Bildr differentiator at this point. No minimal. Not a lot of other no-code tools are doing this level of sign-in as like a true authentication. So it's pretty cool. And then lastly, we have if they're signed in, you can grab their wallet address with a single action. So if they're signed in as a Bildr user, but they originally went through MetaMask, you can just at any time grab their wallet address, which you can use for crypto-related stuff. But this is also something you could build an app that's not crypto-related. Just have them sign in this way. And like I said, in my opinion anyway, that's like the future of how people will be signing in.
Hey, Drew, can we define a little bit what you mean by Bildr user? Because when I hear that, maybe it's just my perspective, but I think of people signing into their Bildr accounts. But what you actually mean is like the end users that you see are the y'all's end users. So it's the users of your app. Okay, they are signing into your app.
Yeah, sorry, that is very confusing and I did not realize. But when I say Bildr user in this context, I'm saying like when I build this app and I'm using users in my app, they're like Bildr user. They're not a MetaMask user. They're not a Xano user. They're not some third party. It's like a native. But what I'm trying to say is in your app as an end user, they'll be signed in. So when they create a record, the created by, is their ID in your app. And when you can save stuff about them, you can whatever. Yeah.
So there's a really funny dichotomy to me in, trust lists and this type of auth where it creates sort of like a paranoia. Like I do a lot of NFTs and into crypto now and I'm doing all this fun stuff. And like every time I connect my wallet to a site, I'm like, ugh, do I want to do this? Like,
I just check my money right after. I'm like, is my
money? Me too. I'm like, click MetaMask. Did I just get, So one of the cool implications of we're effectively doing Web 2.5 here. I mean, we're using a Web 2 identity server to create a session using the wallet and forcing a signature in the wallet to validate that you are that wallet, right? So, but then after you do that validation, we're holding a Web 2 session. So we kind of call this Web 2.5. And I think this is the future of all of the web for like a decade. It's going to take a while for older systems to come up to par and really be truly native Web3 and native crypto. That's just not going to happen overnight. It's sort of like, you know, everyone wants electric cars to be everywhere all the time, but reality, it's just going to take another 20 years. It's just what it is. So same thing with this. So we're kind of thinking, okay, how can we provide some pieces to this puzzle that solve for some of these issues in the world of Web3? Like if you sign into Drew's site here, when you come back, if your session is still valid, if you haven't signed out, or if Drew's Web 2 auth session settings haven't kicked you out, or if you haven't cleared your cookies, you don't have to reconnect your wallet again in order to be authenticated and do whatever it is that you're doing in that site. And I think that's a really powerful positive. It's interesting because it's like we're taking some of the good things about Web 2 and centralized authentication and applying it to the good things about Web 3 and decentralized authentication. And that's where I think there's a lot of power in that. And I don't think the market has really caught up on this at all yet. So we're going to be producing some really cool use cases around this. Even just simple things like I went to this site and I minted something. When I minted, I opted in also. When I come back, my perks that I'm getting off of that site, or the things that I get as a holder of things on that site after I minted, not having to stay connected through MetaMask, but still being validated as a user. Because once you have that, you can do things like run a server-side action that checks the wallet to see if you still hold that token without needing to connect to your wallet again, right? So you can still do things on the back end that protect the assets and make sure you're not distributing things to people who don't hold the tokens anymore, but you're not having to reconnect them again. So there's some really cool stuff that comes out of this. Sorry to take over, Drew. That's just like, to me, that's the really exciting part, is this merging of the two together.
Chief, what do you think? I know you have to run. Do you want to tell us what your feedback?
No, I completely agree. I'm all in, like full steam ahead with Web3. I don't think there's even a reason beyond simply connecting the Web 2 stuff to the Web 3 stuff, but really continuing down the Web 2 path just doesn't make any sense to me. It's totally a thing of, I mean, yeah, you're right. We do it in the military with our CAD cards. We have the PCAD structure. It's 2-factor, 3-factor authentication. Right? You put the card, the pin, the chip, and then it does the authentication from the back end. But even that, it's the same problem. Like you have to hack in every time. You have to put in your pin every single time. I think the MetaMask or the whatever name your wallet should be just as relevant a button as the sign in with Google or sign in with Twitter. Like I think it should just be on.
It's really,
Yeah, it's
you
gonna
brought
get
up a
there.
really interesting point about like other applications that I don't even ever think of, like when you brought up like the military and how the process of using that, like, yeah, there's so much potential out there and so much opportunity to like build things for these people to use and to make like things better and more efficient. That's really cool.
Yeah, you could totally get rid of all CAD cards completely if you did that. You'd get rid of all that. People losing their cards, forgetting their PIN, like you totally, because like you said, on the back end, you can do the server calls to either scan or whatever, or to OpenSea and just check the wallet address and then check for the token, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
It's out in their hands.
Yeah. Coming up next with this, we're basically going to be taking this to another level where, and this won't just, not just for Web3, but for all of our core actions, like creating a record, opening a route. We already have data security and things around that. But I want to add a layer inside of there where you can write a serverless function in Bildr. You can already do this. You can just write a serverless function, publish it. But I want you to be able to tie that serverless function to our core backend operations, like sign in, get data, run API calls, go to a route. So that way, basically you just define for this route, run this serverless function, and here's the expected value. And if you get that expected value back, then perform the core thing that it was supposed to perform, like bring the URL route to the user in the session. The cool thing about that is then you can do something like what you were just describing, John, of check to see if they still have this NFT in their wallet, or there's something in this collection in their wallet. If they do, then give them the route. If they don't, then give them this other route, say, sorry, you're not a holder anymore. You don't get access to that. So we'll be integrating that level of backend along with the data APIs. It's kind of all tied in, because when you get to that level, you're going to want to be doing things like, does this user's data in the data collections inside of Bildr match up to this external API source? Check all that together, and then either allow them to do X or Y based on that, and do it all server side. So I'm really excited about adding that. Once that piece is in there, then coders can come in and just add whatever they want in terms of layers of their own authentication inside of our identity server.
Fantastic.
Love it.
Thank you all.
Well, hey, welcome to everyone who's new, who has jumped on to Bildr Hour part number 2. So Lima kind of had a bit of a hiccup. So what we're going to do is Drew just finished going through the new sign in with Metamask Auth. And we're going to start with this SaaS onboarding app. And Mark's going to take us through that. And then for anyone who's new, we'll jump back in and revisit metrics and the data UI stuff. Awesome, John. Hope you have a great flight and safe travels. Glad you were able to join us before you head out. All right, so SaaS onboarding app. This one is huge, y'all. Mostly because can y'all hear that? No. Okay. My mom's over here cooking breakfast and visiting. She's actually cooking Thanksgiving a week early because my brothers happen to be in town for a wedding. So it's like family time. Okay. So the SaaS onboarding app is so cool. Like this thing Mark built out, it's fully built. Mark, tell us give us the overview, what all is included. And then I think we should probably show just starting from it, right? Because it's literally, you pick that as your starting place and everything is in there and you live view it and it all works. This includes or is made possible by some of the changes that we made to include URL routes automatically in the pattern import and in project templates. So it's one less thing you have to think about if you're trying to use something. And also if you are creating a pattern, you don't have to explain to your users anymore that they have to create a URL route in order for this thing to work. Show us.
Yeah. So Michael was going to do this, but he had it booked on his calendar from 9 to 10 also. And I don't know if you guys know, he's starting his move this week. So he's loading up a thing now. So I'm going to do the quick overview. Michael is going to be creating a set of tutorials on this SaaS Starter project as well to take you into more depth. I'm going to keep it pretty high level and just kind of talk about the different pieces of it. But the idea with the SaaS Starter is actually a user like a month and a half ago asked me on a Friday afternoon for an example. And so I said, well, give me an example and I'll just build that example and then add you as a collaborator and you can just look at it. So on that Saturday, I just went and built this thing, and it's basically, it's pretty simple. It's got a website. It has a sign in dashboard area. And it helps you basically just have tasks, you have employees, and you have customers inside of there. And employees, or I think it's actually called team. Your team, you add a team member and that adds them as having access to your company that automatically gets created whenever you sign up for this app. So you can think of this as it's a basic SaaS app starter kit. So when you bring this in as a project template, you've got a website, you have an authenticated only internal app, And then all the data relationship mechanisms are already built in it for you to dissect to see how you would build this kind of structure. So this is a really common scenario in SaaS, right? You have the first person who signs up from a company. So you're selling B2B. The first person who signs up from that company creates the company account, effectively, or the company record. And then they sort of invite their team members. And there's built-in mechanisms in Bildr where when you do that invite, it creates a new user for your project, for your users get a new user, and it associates that user to that company record, that company entity inside of the data collection, so that only people who are associated get access to that record. There was one question earlier, and I forgot to answer it, about inside the data collection UI showing the child relationship records, and that's coming. It's on my list to add a column where the column type or the field type would be associated child or associated parent collection. And basically, if this is a child of another parent collection, then stored in that value is the ID of the parent. So if it's a company and the company has employees, each employee record would have a field called company ID that stores the same company ID inside of there to match it all up together, do the filtering. So right now you do that manually. You just add a field and you call it company ID, and then you put those IDs in there manually as the records are getting created, and then the filtering just works. But we'll be adding that as part of the UI as well. So let me show my screen, and I'll start from the beginning like Cora suggested. So I just did a new project here, just gave it a project name, today's date, and SaaS Starter. So by default, it has the blank project selected. New users, by the way, get this new onboarding project when they first come in. Drew made this onboarding project. It's in a workspace and has a bunch of pages on it that go over all the basic details. It's a great way to get started now. And then this third one is the SaaS Starter project. If you click preview here, it'll open it up and show you what that looks like. So this is the template website that's on it. It's got full sign in and sign up pages built into it. So when you sign up, you can like upload a image for the profile picture and have a name and email address and all that stuff. So you can come here and preview it and just try it out. But when you click on create project with that selected, it's going to go start the project from that project as the base template. And so we'll let it do its thing here. Generate that project. And there's a couple things I'll go over first. So it comes into a workspace, and I do have a pretty decent sized screen. Hopefully it's not too small for everyone. But everything's in one workspace in this project for now. You can separate this how you want. You can make another workspace for just the website and keep that separate, manage them separately. We decided to put it all in one workspace just to keep it confined, a little less confusing whenever somebody comes in and looks. But this is all the pages of the project. So a few things to note. If I want to, I can literally just click preview here. Everything's already set up. So now this is exactly like that, the preview that I did on the other one, except for this is now my project. It's my default one. So the whole thing is set up and ready to go. And then you can just begin modifying things. So everything in here is custom built. So every style class in here is custom just for this project. So you can also use it as a nice starter pack for styling. If you like the style of this, you can use it. And then there's also another piece that comes in addition to the pages and the styles and the routes and all that stuff. It also comes with a little bit of data built into it. So if I go to data collections and users and go to statuses, the statuses on each task are dynamic. And so they draw from this data collection. So this data collection just has, what, 6 or 7 statuses here, 6 statuses. They go in order. So the order here is going to determine what order they show up in the UI. So this is automatically put in here, but you can just add new statuses, delete them, or modify this however you want. So let's preview this and actually sign in or sign up because there's no users yet. So I'll sign up. Let's see if I have a fun picture to use. This Is that Oliver? Oh, there's my dog. We'll use him. Perfect. There we go. We'll just go, actually, no, we'll go Oliver, not Mark. This is Oliver. And I'm just going to make up an email address.
Bildr famous.
Right? There's no Oliver that works with us. So, and I'm just going to make something up here. There we go. And create the account. Okay, so I create the account. I'll go ahead and say the password. So this created the project, created, what it did is it went in, created a user, created a company record associated to that user, assigned the user to that company. So that way they're automatically associated to them, and then brought them into their dashboard. So the dashboard is pretty simple. It's just 3 different data sets. There's customers, tasks, and team members. You can also view each of those independently here. So here's Oliver. On the dashboard, you can add, and on each of these sections you can add. So if I add a new customer, we'll do another one there. Let's see if I have another one here. We'll use one of Drew's deads. So this is, we'll say Ghosty, ghost.com. That might actually be a real email address, and click create. Yeah, so now I've got a customer here and I can come back and edit it. So it's kind of showing you all the basic CRUD things in a Bildr app. You can do things like archive it and toggle the archive on and off. So this really gives you a good way to go in and like dissect, well, how is this built, right? How do you create something like this in Bildr? So the whole goal of this starter pack, it may not actually be the base. It could be the base for something you're building, but it could also just be a really good learning tool, right? So if I want to go see what happens whenever I toggle that, or how am I showing archived here only whenever it's archived, right? And what happens whenever I click this button and you can see it's like making changes to the data in the background. You can now just dive in and go look at that. So this is that same one. Let me zoom in a little bit. Can't be in an input. So this is that same, actually, was it a customer? Yeah, it was customer. So on here, if I go look at, actually, I'm doing this even better. Whenever you first come in here, you see there's no event bound to it. So this is doing something even different. If I go look at page load, go to page binding, I check to see if it's archived. So I do a condition. I check from the current record field value customers archived, because I'm inside of a specific customer when I'm here. So I go, is the current customer archived? If they're archived, then run this flow. If they're not archived, then run that flow. So if they're not archived, I run a flow where I set the button value to say archive. I set the interaction to on click of that button, go archive it. And I change a style class, which unhides, I remove the display none of the little archived stamp up there. So then when they click on it, it's going to run this action archive customer, which updates the customer record to archived 1. And then it goes back and runs the condition archived again, which will then flip all that stuff back out. So you can come in here and kind of dissect each of these pieces and how I went through the process of building all of it. And there's a lot in here. If you get through all the pieces of this, you can pretty much build anything in Bildr. Like any SaaS is pretty well possible in here. I do some fairly advanced things, like when I toggle this condition, I check the current value of the condition. Current value of the toggle. And then I either refresh including archived or refresh active only. So including archived means I'm only filtering by the company ID. If I go active only, I'm filtering by the company ID and archived 0. So I'm only looking for things where the customer is archived with 0. So that's how that works. So it's setting the value of the grid with a collection of data that's filtered in a certain way. And then also you'll notice, like here, I'm not using data binding. In some of these places I do, and some of these places I don't. And there's reasons for that. So like on this one, I'm not, because when the page loads, I want to run through that toggle condition. So I want to see what's the toggle set at. What's nice about that is if I came in here and I changed the default toggle state to off or on, then my condition is going to automatically handle that for me. So it's going to be, if you default it to on, then when they come in, it's going to show archived. If it's defaulted to off, then when you come in, it's not going to show archived, right? So there's just a ton of detail in here. One of the other things to note, let me zoom out just a little. So this is that app page, the main app page. And what you notice here is that it's effectively blank, right? I mean, it's just a div on the right and a panel on the left. So this thing on the right is called app content. And the panel on the left is a static list of things, right? So I've got these different buttons here that I created. When you click on one of these buttons, it runs this event click, and it's going to do a series of things. One of those things that it does is it opens a specific page into that app content container. So this is the most common way to create a single page web app in Bildr. So I have one page here. This is this outer page here, this one page. I have one container on the right where whatever I click on over here, it's opening a page into that container on the right. Okay. So you have these other pages like the dashboard, the customer list, the task list, the team member list, but all those pages, if you look inside of the studio, you zoom out a little bit so we can see more of them. So this is the dashboard. This is the customer list, task list, team members. So these all open into that container. So that conceptually, that's how you want to approach it. If you do it this way, it means that the customer only does a request. Your customer would only do a request to our server for that page one time, that main app page. Whereas you could also do this in another way where when they click that button, you open another URL route, and that URL route opens like a replica of this page, but with the dashboard in it. You could do it that way as well. But then that's requiring every time they click one of those, it's got to go back to our server, come back and load it and do all these back and forth things. If you do it as a single page web app like this, it's going to be much more efficient. And there's one other benefit on that, and then I'll jump to some questions. If you do it this way as well, if I go into the page load, go into page binding somewhere in here. Oh, actually, I removed all my caching. You can cache things, but I removed it all because of efficiencies we made in the core that made it to where I didn't need to anymore. On bigger projects, you do still want to do some caching, but we even removed, I think, almost every bit of the caching from Bildr project, which is a massive project. But what you can do in here, what's nice about it is you can come into this main page, and because it's all encapsulated in this one page, everything's opening inside of it. You can do things like pre-cache data here if you want to, right? So like I could come in and just cache all my data. And actually, I think I do some data caching here. Yeah, I do. So when the dashboard loads, which happens by default, so the app page loads, and then inside of there during the page load action, it opens the dashboard page automatically into the content. And when that happens, it's going to run the page load of the dashboard page, which part of that page load does a cache of all the customers, all the tasks, all the team. And then I also set a variable for active customers and active tasks. And I do that so I can just reference those things rather than having to like do more data requests. So what that means is that when the user does a refresh here, it's going to load pretty quick. And in the background, I'm caching everything. So now when they click on something, when they go to customers, there's zero lag because nothing's going to the server anymore. The page is already there. The data is already there. Everything's there. It's literally just has to render it. And once it's rendered it once, it actually speeds it up even more. The browser actually does some really nice of its own like element caching stuff that we don't even have to deal with. But once you render it, it's even faster. So there's a lot of benefits to doing it this way. That single page web app is the way to go for like most projects. All right, so I know it's a lot. Like we could really go into this for quite a while. This one's fairly deep, but yeah, we can ask some questions.
Yeah, so Kem's got a question, but before we get to that, I think this thing is so awesome. I would probably start from this and actually just change like labels and like upload images, and like you could get running if you were just doing something like that. I could get running so fast. But then of course there are people who like really actually, like you mentioned, this is going to be a really good learning resource for how to do some of those things. You could just replicate in the setup in your own project. And yeah, so I think this is just like fantastic. And I love that you just start from it and you can, it's just working. It's already working. So that is like super powerful. And we do hope to have more of these types of projects for y'all to start from. So yeah, let's open up questions for these. It does look like we had one here in the chat.
Yeah, and I can answer Kim's question. Yeah, thank you, Kim. So there's two different ways. It's really up to you, right? So it depends on how you set this up. In this case, I'm not trying to.
Can you repeat the question for the recording?
Sorry. Yeah.
Thanks.
So the question was, is the archive logic processed client side or server side, right? And the foundation of that question, the underlying question is really, is there a way to restrict access to specific data server side so that users on the front end can't just hack it and go get that information, right? And that would be totally up to how you build it inside of Bildr. In this case, I'm not concerned about like them seeing archived versus unarchived data at all. But there's a bunch of different ways you can do it in here. You're basically building your own client-side, server-side relationships between the front end and the back end of Bildr on your own. So if, for instance, you decide that you want to restrict it, you can do it in a couple of ways. Simplest way is to basically don't do any caching like what I did, of course, like don't do that. And then also when you do the request for the active customers here, it's only that happens server side, right? So the filter actually is going to run on the server and return only the active customers to the page. So that would be the simplest way. It's not actually, technically that can still be hacked, because like if you go in and you actually can break point in it and stop the JavaScript, modify the request, and you could technically go do that. The likelihood of that in an app like this is probably pretty low. I wouldn't really worry about it here. But if you want to get like super all the way to it, you can do, you can go all the way. Like if I wanted to really, really restrict it down, I would actually like move the data out of one collection into another and be like active over here, archived over here, and set data restrictions to limit that access per user or per user role effectively, which is exactly how I do it in here for the company records. So on a company record, if I go to the collection settings, it's got an end user restriction called user invitation only. What that means is that only the creator of the company record and any other users of this SaaS who that user or others have invited to this record, right? So it's like, it's effectively creating your own roles in here is really what that's doing. Your end users are like creating their own roles. And then this child relationship to other collections means that logic is going to run downstream, and all of that logic is handled server side. So if you just went to my app and you looked at and you signed in as a new customer, and you that created a company record, and then you tried to say, take this ID of one of these other company records and manipulate the request to the server to get that company instead of your company, the backend won't let you get it because your authenticated user doesn't have rights to that company, which means that it doesn't have rights to anything downstream of there. So that logic setup can be as simple or as complicated as you want, and it just depends on the need. So yeah, it goes as deep as you want it to go basically in there. Hopefully that answered it. That can get very complicated very fast if you're wanting like a really complex setup. We have some super duper complex setups for old customers that we used to work with that are like insane, where you have like 50 different types of things, and then you give them their own admin panels for them to create their own roles of their own users inside of that company. It's like you're at like the meta level, defining the admin panels for them to create those roles, and you can do all of that in Bildr.
And control permissions of what, yeah.
Exactly.
And then it looks like Kim had another question after that. Oh wait, did you
I think it
answer
was the same.
Okay. Cool,
Yeah.
cool. All right.
Oh, in Xano, you could do that too. You could technically get the same thing using Xano as a backend. So there's nothing like we like it when you use Bildr collections, right? And over the long haul, I think it'll be easier to maintain, easier to keep up with, because we have some nice things in there like resonance, which is automatic pushing of data out to all sessions and things like that. But we really don't have any preference over it. Like we see most web apps need internal data, they need user data, they need authentication, they need external API call data that's stored, they need API data that's not stored in Bildr. So we just sort of see it like, no, just open it up. Depends on your app, whatever your app needs.
Okay, super. Any other questions related to the SaaS Starter project, or any feedback, or maybe requests for future starting projects? Now's the time to let us know.
I'm trying to see, what, it might be good. I think I'll show real quick how this team members works, because this, when you add a team member, so if I'm in here and I go to team members and I go to add, I put in a name and an email address, and what that does is it creates a user inside of this Bildr project, and it creates this relationship record between the user and the particular company that I'm a part of as the person inviting this team member. So that's what does that invite mechanism. And this is the part where most people, when they're trying to think through conceptually, like how to build out a system like this is the part where people get tripped up a lot. And conceptually, what you're doing is I have a company record and I have a user record, and I need to create an association between those two. And the reason we do it as an association is because sometimes it's a many-to-many thing. You might have the same user who has access to multiple companies. So you want to have an association between each one of those. So the process for doing that, if I go look at the flow that actually creates that, I think it's this one. Yeah. So it's actually a multi-step process. In this case, I just did it simply. This is really not the best way to do it, but I literally just like generate a GUID password and then send them an email with it. Wouldn't suggest doing that long-term or anything, but that's just how I did it here to make it simple for people to think through. So I create a new user and I associate a custom field that's in that user record called company ID with the current page's company ID, the current logged in company ID. And then I create the user login ID from the email. I put the name in based on what they put in the name. And then the password is the one I generated. And like, if I were doing this, I would probably just do it. If I were doing it all the way through and creating like SendGrid emails and all that kind of stuff, I would probably go do this with a magic link, send them the SendGrid email with the magic link so that, and then they go set up their own password afterward. After the user is created, I then create what's called a record association entity. So there's a collection in every project called record association. And this is that association between a specific record and a user. So in this case, it's a company. So what's the data collection that I want? It's the company's data collection. And what's the record ID that I want? So which company? It's the company ID that I'm in right now. And then what can they do? They can edit, yes or no. Can they invite other people? Can they permanently delete the company record? Can they view the company record? And then what's the login that I'm associating to that? So I create the user with this login ID, and then I associate the user to this company record. And that's what provides them that access. This also has server-side restrictions on it, meaning if you don't have access to this company record, you can't create a record association between someone else in this company, right? So you can only do it if you have rights to do it. And the rights mean I either created the company in the first place and I have full rights over it, or this can invite setting is set to 1 in that association record, right? So it's all that logic is running server side. So that's how you create these relationships between these things. And by doing it this way, it does add some steps to your process of building, but it also makes it to where it's completely open-ended. You can literally create whatever record associations you want, 1-to-1, many-to-1, 1-to-many, however you need to do it, or many-to-many, however you'd like to apply them, because it's just association records and all of it's checked server side, so you can't hack it in the front end, right? So I know that one can get real complex and real deep. I'm excited to see Michael put a tutorial around that one, because it's going to be a long tutorial probably to get through that one, but that's a piece of clarity that I think a lot of people need.
Do you know can you tell us like how is he going to be approaching the tutorial? Like, is it going to be like, how would you build this thing? Or is it actually going to be going through explaining the different parts?
Yeah, we were thinking explaining the different parts, because building this from scratch in a tutorial is probably 20 hours of runtime, and it's probably not as valuable as like, let's go take, because some of this stuff is simple. There's no need to talk about styling every piece of
and
this.
y'all can just go in and see it, right?
Right. And there's other tutorials around styling or, open page action, stuff like that. But there are things where there needs to be some depth around it. Like, and a lot of it is the things I showed, right? Like, how do you do these toggles for showing and hiding? And what are the different ways of filtering by archive, like Kim's question? And what are the reasons, and how do you set up these associations and end user restrictions on collections, and what's the purpose of that? Like, that's really what we're going for with those tutorials.
Okay, awesome. Okay, yay, I'm so happy. I love this so much, and I'm excited to have more of these come out for y'all too. Okay, so we can, I only think it was a few people who jumped in actually at 10 o'clock. So I don't know if we have to revisit metrics overall, or if it's like just enough that I share this recording later. What do you think?
That's what I was thinking. It doesn't look like too many new people, maybe a couple.
Okay. All right. So how about we just keep going on some of the things? Like, I would like to, since we have a little bit of time, if you're okay, does anyone need to? Okay. Okay. Like, for example, changing the revision. I just want to like hit this one time because I know Fraser's on the call, and I did promise him a tutorial on this. But I think we should go ahead and change it. And here's the point that I would want to make here is you can publish this and create a revision before you start going to make changes. So if you ever needed to revert it back to the original state, you could easily do that. So can we show that process? Because you guys can apply this to a bunch of things. So if you get your app to a really good place, publish it, which will create a revision of that state. And then you can always roll back your dev version to that state if you went fiddled and broke something. And so I just want to show you guys you can now do that. But you have to be very careful because it does completely override everything that you've done in your dev version. So are you down to share?
Yeah. I'm not muted, right? Yeah. Right. So a couple things there. One is you are always editing the development revision when you're in the studio. So what I mean by that is if I go to deployments, you can see that there are by default 3 deployments with every project. There's development deployment, test deployment, and production deployment. Now I haven't published yet, so I'm editing the development deployment. And when I click preview, I'm always previewing the development deployment. So that means when I make changes to something here, those changes push out real time over to my preview because it's the same deployment, same revision. If I want to, when I'm ready, I can publish by going here and going publish to production or test. I'll choose what source I'm going from, which is like 99% of the time going to be development to test or test to development. That's the normal flow. You publish from development to test, you run through a set of testing protocols that you'll
Test to production.
Well, no, I mean, in development, I'll go from development to test first, and then I'll test everything in that test environment. And then when I feel like, okay, test is good to go, then I'll publish from test to production, right? Like that's the normal flow that you go through.
Yeah, no, you just said
Oh, did I say it wrong?
test to dev. And I was like, no, don't do that.
No, you don't want to do that. So let me just do like test, and I'll just, I don't know, do like this. So it's something that's unique. So you put in a subdomain, and then you publish to that subdomain, right? So now I have these two things. I have my development. So if I go open this, this is my test environment that I just created on a new subdomain that I created, test 983, whatever it was. I still have my preview, which we auto generate a subdomain for that preview, right? So if I click preview in here, it's still going to take me to this one, right? So the idea is this test environment now is at a static point in time of the moment I clicked publish. So whatever was in there at that moment, this is now static to that. So for instance, if I go back in here and I go to the website and I change this from, automate to, make fun all the things, something like that. Okay. So if I go here in my, let me go home. So this is in my development revision, the preview, I see the change, right? But on my test revision where I published out to the test environment, that change is not here because it's its own unique deployment that's set at whatever it was when I published it. So if I want to make changes to that test environment now, I have to go back in, publish again, and we're going to do again from development to test, continue, and it's doing the publish. And then now, once it finishes, I can go back here. And if I refresh the page now, I have the update from that change that I made in development and then published out to test. So just in general, there's this process that you're going to go through. Once I have my test environment, I'm comfortable, I'm happy with the test environment, then I'm going to go do another one where I'll publish from test to production. Okay. So when I publish from test to production, this is typically going to be on a custom domain. You're going to set up a custom domain for that. It's yourwebsite.com. Whereas the test environment, we typically are like, you can just use a subdomain. They're free. You can create as many as you want in Bildr. And that gives you kind of leverage over creating these different environments. But what Cora was talking about was, what if I want to take a snapshot? So I want something like outside of this process, right? I have this test deployment, and it's a process that I'm going through. I go from dev to test to production over time. But maybe I feel like I want to take a backup of like right now, and I don't ever want to publish over that, right? So there's two ways you can do it. One thing is if I go into the deployments list and I go to the test revision, say, I can actually click here to change revision, and it's going to give me this warning. It says, are you sure you want to change the revision? Because you're just going to like overwrite things. You go continue, and that gives you the ability to change that revision. Now I only have the one right now, so it's not a thing, but you get the idea. It'll give you a drop down, and you can just change the revision of that deployment. So now I can always go back to it. So you don't technically have to do anything. I can always go back to any old revision that I created, any old publish that I created. But sometimes maybe I just want I want a snapshot that I can go access, right? So what I'll do is I'll create a new deployment called snapshot, and then maybe today's date.
I would usually put like a little descriptor in here. Eventually,
Sure.
like we're redoing this and we'll have like a notes area so you can add notes. But like, for example, before starting like a big feature change, you can add like, before new dashboard changes or something like that. Yeah.
I like that. So before dashboard changes, so something like that, right? So now I'll create that deployment. So now I have this new deployment. So now what I can do is from my current state, publish again, but I'm going to publish from development to this snapshot deployment that I created. And we'll go another subdomain. So we could just do the same thing. I would probably just copy this and put the same thing in there. It should remove all the spaces and everything. So what's cool about doing it this way, so now I can just leave that sitting there forever. And I have that sitting there if I ever want to access it or use it, or if I want to use the revision that's in there and put that, maybe I go make all my dashboard changes and then I'm like, ooh, that was a big mistake. So now my development revision has all these dashboard changes in it that I don't actually want, but I have this snapshot that I can roll back to anytime in the future. The other cool thing about this is I can actually use this snapshot and test with it and like compare the two, right? I can have like the old version and the new version totally outside of what my customers are experiencing, right? And I'm just messing with those things. Or maybe I ask certain users, give them this login link, say, hey, test users, can y'all help me out and come here and see if you like this better? Sort of like A/B testing with trusted clients. And we did this a lot with like B2B clients where they'll have the development area that we work in that they don't have access to. Then there's a test area where our customer has access to it because we're building for them. So like if you're an agency, you're building for them, you need them to test things out beforehand. But then if they have thousands or tens of thousands of customers, they'll typically have a subset of customers who are sort of like trusted customers who get access to early features and things like that. So you can have a deployment just for those customers, and they go to that special area to sign in, and they get to play with all the new features as they release them out. It's also just another great way for having like full-on testing. We would tell our clients like, listen, you're not fully tested until you've been like in production for 100 days with 100 daily active users. You know, like that means that you're actually tested all the way through, because edge cases in large SaaS products, like good luck. There's just no amount of pre-testing you can do. You got to get users in there. So I'm going to show you how to roll back next, Fraser. That's going to be the next step here.
So Mark,
yeah,
can you make like you're going to make some changes to this, to like the dev version, and then change the revision? Okay, cool.
Yeah, exactly. So right now I have this, this is my current state of, let me close this. Okay, so we have a couple of things going on, right? So now we have this snapshot that I took, which is the snapshot before, right? So I'll open that up. So this is the current state of the snapshot.
Sorry, I think you might have to refresh the studio to see the different revisions. I don't know if they show up right away or not.
In here? Is there a bug?
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah, I think there's a bug because it should have shown all the new ones.
Yeah, and to grab the revision ID. So you just might want to refresh the studio real quick.
Yep, yeah, I'll do that. So we have this current state of this snapshot deployment that I took, right? There's a state over here of this. It's just going to stay there. So now let's pretend like I come in here and I'm working for 2 weeks and I'm making tons of changes. And so I'll just do like, this is the change, right? So obviously it wouldn't just be like changes to one text box. It would be, some massive set of changes that you need to roll back from. So now my development revision is this, right? So if I go preview, it's no longer saying that whole sentence. It's just saying this is the change, right? So now I get through all this and I say, oh no, shouldn't have made all those changes. I want to roll back. So I have this snapshot over here and I can close that out, go back over here. And this is where Cora was saying I need to refresh the studio to get that revision. So I'll go ahead and do that. But basically what I'm going to do now is go to deployments on the left, go into the development deployment, which is the one that we're always editing. I'm going to open that up and we're going to go change revision. So what this is doing is changing the base revision of the development deployment. And we can change it to any revision that we've created before. And this is where it's like, hey, listen, when you do this, you're overriding what you're editing in the studio. Okay. Now you can technically always move it back to the other one. You could change it back to the original one if you wanted to, but think about what you're doing when you do that, right? If you make that change and you start editing, you've now got this branch where you've got like one set of changes over here, another set of changes over here. So you got to be very cognizant about what you're doing here. So when I click in here, I can go in and change it. This was that one that I created last. So I'll just swap it to that one, confirm my revision change. Wait, that's not the one I want. I don't want the last one. Is it the last one? Yeah, the last one. Yeah. And then confirm the revision change. And that's going to make the change, refresh the studio. And now I'm back to here where I had started. So it no longer has that. This is the, so if I click preview again, my development revision is now back to what it was before. And again, I can always go back in here. Like I can always go in here and do that again and just change it back to the base revision. So if I say, never mind, I want to go back to what I had originally, I can do that too. And it'll take me right back to the original state again. So yeah, so now I'm back to this is the change instead of the full sentence. So it's really just up to you how you go back and forth. But those revisions never get removed. So technically, every time you publish, you are getting a snapshot. Every single time you publish, that stays there forever, and you can always roll it back. You don't have to remember the date time, Tom. You can go into the other deployments. Like typically, if you do it this way, you're going to want to take that same one, right? Like I've got this snapshot sitting over here with this revision. And so you're going to want to pull it from that one. One of the changes, so like you can just come in here and read it, I guess is my point, right? You go Friday, November 19th at 10:50. That's the one I'm going to go roll back to, right? But what Cora was saying was the real updates that we really want to do here, it's not just for the revision control, it's for the publish as well. Go ahead and build in release notes, naming of that, all those pieces in as you publish, because we're just generating that revision name with the date timestamp that it was created at. So there's no reason to not allow you to just change it, just overwrite it. So you really have full control, just like with everything else in Bildr. We give you all the control and all the power, but you got to be really careful. You can break things. You can't really go too far astray with it, because at the end of the day, you can always just like switch it back to the other thing. Where it gets ugly, if you do this wrong, if you decide one day I'm going to change that revision, and then you forget you changed that revision, and then you come in the next day and you start editing on this branch, and now you've worked for 5 days in this branch. There's no merge right now. And eventually we're going to have a merge where you can actually merge these things together. Until then, though, you got to be really careful, because you would have to recreate that 5 days of work if you did that by mistake. So in general, I never do this, by the way. Like I almost never, I don't think I've ever actually changed the development revision before. I've just never had the need. But you definitely do have these branching scenarios, and we do want to solve for those long term. And we think about it like developers do. We think about it like we want it to be merging. We want it to be forks. We want it to be, I have my own revision I'm working on. Drew has his own, Dorian has his own, and then we merge when we're ready, just like a traditional development process. There's like trade-offs to all this stuff. I love that idea, but also I like to see Drew's changes in real time. Like I don't want to have to merge it. I like seeing when he updates the website without me having to go take his merges, or him committing or any of that stuff. I like it real time, but we do want to give everyone the options.
Great. Okay, so I think we are at the hour, and so we can wrap up this one. I will upload a recording. If you guys have any residual questions, chat us in the Discord and we can get to them. But yeah, we're really excited. I think if we want to just share really quickly some of the things that we're thinking about for the next big update is going to be kind of focused on external APIs, and then giving, allowing your Bildr data to be accessed by other APIs, right, Mark?
Yeah, so we're doing a short release over the next couple of weeks. This is primarily bug fixes and some of the straggling things that we didn't get to complete in this last release. That release got so big, it was hundreds and hundreds of tasks and commits. And so we were like, we need to get this thing out. So we just started cutting. So now we're going to take a couple of weeks, finish out some of those pieces. Once that's done, we already have developers working on some of these pieces, these new things for the next big release as well. But once that's done, we'll put full focus on it. The primary thing there is this data APIs. So the data APIs is building out APIs to your collections, basically creating endpoints around your collections. Good news is we've actually already done this 2 or 3 times in previous versions of the tool set before we launched Bildr as a product, using it as an internal tool set. Our customers needed APIs, and Dorian and I and some other, we called ourselves configurators back then, building sites for people and building projects without writing code. We had to do it and we didn't know how to code. So we had our coders build the ability for us to generate APIs. And it's really cool the way that that worked. We're obviously taking all that knowledge and applying it into Bildr and making it even better in there. So I'm pretty excited about it. Making endpoints out of your data can do all kinds of things. I'm sure everyone who is looking forward to that knows what you can do with that. But we do have some fun things that we think kind of take it to a next level, like what I was talking about before, of like integrating that with the core with serverless actions. So that way, like you can do your own server-side checks for whatever you want for your own data restriction purposes. And you're not relying on Bildr to ever like implement specific, ways to contain things or ways to secure things. So we're pretty excited about it. And it's something that we want to, like our whole team, everyone wants APIs into these collections because we all have projects that need them. So it's coming. That's probably going to be the biggest thing in that release. That next release will also include updates to the pricing structure. So we'll be making some changes to the pricing, and in particular around publishing and around like actually charging for hosted data. Like I was saying earlier, when the certain users, some customers are now actually costing us a good bit of money for like $9 a month, and they're running a lot through. We did it intentionally. Like we wanted to let people build whatever they want to build, and we can understand what the usage metrics need to look like across all these different products and projects that people are building, so that we charge people appropriately across all of those different ways. Because some people build very simple websites that get 10 visitors a day. We want to make sure that they're not being overcharged, while also making sure that the people who have 10,000 hits a day and are doing like big data work are getting charged appropriately. So we're at a point now where we have enough information to go off of that. So that'll be another part of that release, is starting to charge for that end usage on the product, on the projects that you've launched. We do expect those small projects, you're not going to get any overage on those at all, is our expectation. So we'll see. And then the last piece that I really will want to push for in that release is more Web3 integrations. So we haven't really launched it, or we haven't really announced it yet, but we will be launching a Bildr Web3 pass, an NFT pass that gets you access to all kinds of fun Web3 things going forward, and templates and all kinds of things like that. So we're excited about it. The launch of that will happen prior to that big release. It'll happen probably in the next couple of weeks, but we'll do more and more integrations into the studio. Like we can check to see if you have that NFT pass, and if you do, we can give you special things inside the studio and special access inside of the Discord, things like that. So should be fun. I think that's all the big stuff, and like hundreds of little things.
Yeah. And then I'm just going to end with one word, because we're going to keep the mystery. Is one word? I think it's one word.